Good evening, everyone. I'm Sarah Davis. I'm the Dean of the Santa Fe campus. I am going to hand this over in a moment to my colleague to introduce tonight's speaker, but I wanted to take this opportunity to welcome our many visitors to campus. Our Graduate Institute low residence students are here for a convening weekend. Welcome. And of course, families, friends, parents, we welcome you for Family and Friends weekend. I hope you have a wonderful couple of days with us. I am looking forward to meeting with you tomorrow afternoon, getting to know you a little bit better. In what is a kind of delightful coincidence, you all are going to meet my parent tonight. My father is tonight's speaker, Michael Davis, Professor Emeritus at, I was about to say St. John Sarah Lawrence College. It's my great pleasure to have him here with us, to have him I welcome him in sharing his thinking with us. It is a special occasion for me, and I'm so glad you're all here with us this weekend. At that, I'm going to hand it over to Michael Golliber, who will give a formal introduction for tonight's speaker. Thank you so much.
Good evening. Just a quick reminder, after the lecture, we'll stop, take a break for a few minutes, and then we'll get together again for the question period. I'm very honored, once again, to introduce Professor Michael Davis to the St. John's community. Mr. Davis began teaching at Sarah Lawrence College in 1977. When I arrived as a freshman at Sarah Lawrence in 1984, Mr. Davis and I were by chance assigned to one another. He was my Don, I his mentee, and I was enrolled in his freshman studies seminar on ancient philosophy. Now at the time, for some reason I thought I wanted to become a rabbi when I grew up. And Mr. Davis certainly did not try to dissuade me from that path. But he did insist that for the independent study we were also doing together, that we read Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morals. During our first meeting, I expressed horror at what I took to be Nietzsche's anti-Semitism. Mr. Davis quickly made it clear that I hadn't yet learned how to read. That was the true beginning of my education. Mr. Davis thinks and reads deeply and has written books on a good number of the authors on our program. Since I'm not supposed to encourage you to read secondary sources, I'll mention only a few of the books which are here in our library, and there's a corner over there where you can take a look at them. One, Ancient Tragedy and the Origins of Modern Science. Another, Aristotle's Poetics, the Poetry of Philosophy. Another, the Autobiography of Philosophy, Rousseau's Reveries of the Solitary Walker. And a final one, The Soul of the Greeks, an Inquiry. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Davis.
It's always a pleasure to lecture here. You read and love the books that I read and love. I shared a graduate school mentor with two of your faculty, one of them a friend and former dean. Two other faculty now here were my students. And of course, it's Parents' Weekend, and your current dean is my daughter. So lecturing at St. John's is sort of like coming home. But should I really say this in a lecture entitled, There's No Place Like Home? Does that old adage mean that no other place can compare to home? Or really that there is no such thing as home? We'll see. Maybe both. Second part of my title, In Plato's Republic. Now, it gives us some place to locate an otherwise impossibly broad and dense question. And yet, of Platonic dialogues, The Republic is so impossibly broad and dense that it's hard to know where to begin a finite talk. And I assume you're not here for an infinite talk. So while I don't usually do this, those of you who know me, I'm going to be a little disorderly and jump around a lot tonight in the Republic. So consider this little introduction an apology, which, like many apologies, is really an apologia, a defense speech, as in, I'm really sorry for this, but there's really no other way. Again, we'll see. Any reading The Republic is an account of justice, and so an account of the relation between the public good and the private good, between the political order and the individual human being, between morality and happiness. The issue is whether the elements of the Greek expression for gentleman, kalos katathos, beautiful or noble and good or useful, are unproblematically compatible or perhaps in perpetual tension with one another. When Socrates ends the dialogue with the words eupratomen, does he mean let us act well, as in let us do what is noble, or let us fare well, as in let us do what will make us happy, or since in Greek the same words for both, does he mean that to do the one is also to do the other? Okay, my first jump. In the perfect political order, philosophers rule. In order to do so, they have to be educated. In Book 7 of the Republic, that education includes solid geometry. So the account of how to put together justice and happiness requires solid geometry. Now, solid geometry enters the Republic, the argument, at 528a, when, having started the philosophical education with arithmetic, arithmetike, and calculation, logistike, they're treated as one, maybe because counting is already a kind of adding. Having started in that way, Socrates then moves to geometry, which, it's worth remembering, literally means measurement of earth. This order makes a certain sense. First, we see many things as one. We count them. This unity is an arithmos, a number. Then we add and subtract these numbers, multiplying presumably being a version of addition and division of subtraction. So we calculate, logizisthai. And then by treating the numbers as lengths in a spatial plane, understanding the ratio between them as constituting figures, we get plane geometry. Next on Socrates' list of philosophical studies is astronomy. Now, while his interlocutor, Glaucon, is quick to approve, Socrates immediately takes this move back, chiding himself. His mistake, after a plane, I said, this is a quotation, taking a solid in its going around before taking itself as itself. It holds rightly next after a second dimension or augmentation, an auxe, to take a third. And this is, I suppose, the augmentation or the dimension of cubes and the participation in bathos, depth or thickness. Now, this sounds simple enough. From plane, two-dimensional geometry, Socrates should have moved to three-dimensional geometry, the account of solids at rest, before he moved on to astronomy, which involves solids in motion. But then Glaucon points out that solid geometry has yet to be discovered. Socrates admits as much and gives several reasons for this lack. They're all worth unpacking, but here let's just be content with his claim that solid geometry is sought weakly because it's hard. Nevertheless, in the face of all these things, it is augmented by force owing to its charm. Now, while Euclid's Elements, in which books 11 through 13 deal with solid geometry, in which these books 11 through 13 deal with solid geometry, is written at least a century after the dramatic date of the Republic, Plato wrote a dialogue called the Timaeus, the drama of which arguably takes place just the day after the Republic. And in the Timaeus, Socrates, the narrator, Timaeus, constructs the cosmos out of three-dimensional figures generated from triangles. So we would surely call this solid geometry. And if that weren't enough, the Timaeus is, after all, a different text. There's Socrates' strange argument in Book 9 of the Republic that the king will live 729 times more pleasantly than the tyrant. It goes like this. There are three kinds of pleasure. One legitimate, where the soul is ruled by logismos, calculation, and a pair of bastards, when the soul is ruled either by either of its other two parts, thumos, spiritedness, or epithemia, desire. In the descending order of goodness that Socrates has introduced of political regimes and then of the souls that are parallel to them, the tyrant stands third from the oligarchic man, and the oligarchic man third from the best, the king. If the king experiences legitimate pleasure, then the tyrant makes his home with a phantom pleasure that is third from the phantom pleasure of the oligarch, the democratic man ranking between them. And the oligarch's phantom pleasure is in turn third from the genuine pleasure of the king, the timocratic man, is ranking between them. According to Socrates, this means, quote, the tyrant has been removed from true pleasure by a number that is 3 times as many as 3 times. Socrates then claims that on the basis of this number, of its length, the pleasure of the tyrant is to be understood as a plane. Once getting the number 9 by multiplying 3 times 3, Socrates first finds its dunamis, its power or its square, which is 81, as twice removed from the true pleasure. And then the third dimension, augmentation, the cube, as 3 times removed. The result of all of this, if turning it around, someone were to say by how much the truth of pleasure, if turning it around, someone were to say how much by the truth of pleasure the king has been removed from the tyrant, he will find him living 729 times more pleasantly by completing the multiplication, but the tyrant will be removed by the same multiplication, 729 times, more aggrievedly. So Glaucon responds by calling this calculation of relative pleasure and pain in the just and unjust lives a mechanon, which might be translated, as Alan Bloom translates it, prodigious, but it is also regularly translated as something like deviceless or even impossible. We ought never underestimate Plato's sense of humor. Here, in order to establish its truth, Socrates adds the cherry on top of his calculation by saying that if one divides 729 by 2, voila, one gets the number of days in the year. Apparently his calculation has revealed not only an order, a taxis, but an order, a cosmos. But let's go back. In Book 7, Glaucon had claimed, and Socrates agreed, that solid geometry had yet to be discovered. Here in Book 9, Socrates makes calculations, however amusing they are meant to be, involving squaring and then cubing. And he uses the very same terms, dunamis, square, and third auxe, dimension or augmentation, that he had used previously to argue for the absence of solid geometry. Does Socrates' new calculation mean that what we call solid or three-dimensional geometry does already exist? Maybe, but let's look at how he describes the object of the as yet to be discovered geometry. It's what is stereon, solid, and has depth, bathos. This certainly sounds like what we mean by solid geometry, but wait, as Jacob Klein remarks, quote, "There is hardly anything in the world less solid than a geometrical solid." Stereon, solid, first means firm, like a rock. And bathos, depth, well, it certainly does refer to a third dimension, also means thick or dense. It can indicate the thickness of a fog, the depth of water, the depth of soul, profundity. Is it possible that Socrates means by geometry of solids the measure not simply of a third dimension, which after all is qualitatively no different from the length and width that constitute the measurements in plane geometry, but rather a mathematical measure of firmness, of thickness, of density. That is, not of the solidity that Jacob Klein encloses in scare quotes, but of really solid solidity. Socrates claims to have erred by moving too quickly to bodies in motion. He should have slowed down and first treated what he characterizes as tein bathus, auxes, methodon. This does translate, again, as Bloom translates it, as the investigation of dimension of depth, but it also translates as the investigation of depth of dimension. The Greek is ambiguous, and in Plato and elsewhere, ambiguity lends itself to a certain depth. The first version is our solid geometry. But what would the second be? If Socrates moved too fast, what was it that tempted him to jump ahead to astronomy before taking solid itself by itself? Is solidity ever experienced other than through motion? So we approach a large cube. Can we tell by looking at it if anything is beneath its surface? How do we test the density of its dimension? Maybe we kick it, or we try to lift it, or we push it, or we pull it, or we press on it. That is, we try to move it. Density is what resists kinesis, motion, or change. It shows itself as a force of opposition, as a kind of war with what's outside of it that sets it apart from other things and makes it distinct, particular. Body is thumatic, doesn't like to be pushed around. The experience, the pathos of density or solidity, is what singles things out without allowing for an account or a logos of itself apart from some action on it. Think of the common Greek verb paskein, from which we get our pathos. Paskein means both to undergo or experience and to suffer. To undergo the world is to run into resistance. Learning the world hurts. Or as the chorus of Aeschylus' Agamemnon tell us, pathemathos, learning by suffering. Socrates and all of us have to skip over solids at rest to solids in motion because there's no getting at solidity that is fixed and stable itself by itself. And yet, this inside, always hidden from us, is what differentiates things. To know anything in its particularity would mean to disclose this hiddenness. But it is a disclosure possible only as a response to having been acted upon. Solid geometry would require a yet-to-be-invented mathematics of solidity. Modern mathematical physics claims to provide such an account, and is incredibly impressive, but in the Republic at least, Socrates calls its possibility into question. Second jump. Nobody is at home in the Republic. The first person Socrates quotes in his narration is a slave who has no proper home. Socrates then names 10 characters in the dialogue. As the Republic takes place in the Piraeus, a port city on the sea and connected to Athens solely by what are called the Long Walls, it's only ambiguously Athens. And so the 6 Athenian citizens, including Socrates, are not exactly at home. There's one foreigner, Thrasymachus, an itinerant rhetorician. He's clearly not at home. The remaining 4 are what are called metics, resident aliens. They live in the Piraeus, but they do not have the status of citizens. Athens isn't really their home. Still, among them is Cephalus, who is nominally the head, that's what his name means in Greek, the head of the household where the conversation of the Republic unfolds. So one might think then that at least he is at home, yet this house or home is first said to be that of Polemachus, his son. And there is reason to think his father is not fully in control. Again, an interesting ambiguity in the language. Cephalus' head claims that if he were en dunamai, to make his way to town, he would. Now, Bloom translates this as, if I had the strength, which is quite right, but it might equally mean, if I were in power. Still, though old, Cephalus is at least nominally central. Initially, head sits on a head cushion, and the guests are arranged around him. Only if family roles are utterly settled and secure is home utterly settled and secure. But are family relations ever fixed firmly in this way? If there were, there wouldn't be any Greek tragedy. Finally, Socrates is, as always, an interesting case. As an Athenian, he too is not at home in the Piraeus, and his perceived strangeness to his fellow citizens suggests that he's in some sense a stranger, an alien to them. Plato never forgets the trial and execution of Socrates by the city of Athens. Still, does Socrates perhaps offer us the tantalizing possibility of someone who is at home with not being at home? Someone with a habit of having no habits? Oikos, house, home, and words cognate with it occur frequently in the Republic. This proves particularly important in a dialogue that characterizes justice as doing one's own thing. On the one hand, each is to do his own thing, how to pratein, in the city. On the other hand, doing one's own thing is understood as doing the things of home, oikeopragia. To say mine and to have a home are connected. In Book 5, speaking of the coming to be of the city of which they've just sketched the eidos, the form, the idea, in other words, its politeia, its regime, they've just sketched it in books 2 through 4, Socrates asks, what ensures the loyalty of its citizens? This leads to a short digression in which Glaucon agrees, without argument, that their city, of course, will have to be Greek. Socrates then goes on to distinguish the factional wars among Greek cities who are kin from the all-out wars against the utterly alien barbarians. In one Stephanus page on this question, there are 10 instances of words that are cognate with oikos. Their translations vary from kin to own to house to founding, but without stretching too much, we might translate oikeoi, kin, as homies, and oikitsein, to found, as to homestead. Home is what is at issue here. Whenever the argument demands an attachment to the city that's powerful and absolutely necessary, but unarguable or without a logos, alagon, home is invoked. Home is what makes the eidos, the form of the polis, its politeia, something solid, something real. I remember when I was just starting college. It was my first trip home from college. It was for some reason before Thanksgiving. Maybe it was Thanksgiving. I'm not sure. It's funny because the details of this story, I could tell it as though it makes sense, but the details as I remember them make no sense whatsoever. I can't fit them together. But I'm going to tell the story anyway. So I'm coming home on a bus, and I lived in a sort of villagey, rural kind of community, and I'm getting close to the center of town, which is a crossroads with a blinking light, and Roxy Cleaners. I don't even know if Roxy Cleaners exist anymore, but I do remember that I saw the Roxy Cleaners and I started to tear up. I was coming home. It was the sign that I was coming home. But the problem, obviously, is that Roxy Cleaners they had lots of outlets, and I don't think I teared up at every Roxy Cleaner. So my attempt to explain after the fact what it meant to come home meant sort of invoking things, articulating things. It didn't really come together. They didn't really make sense. But nevertheless, the feeling was that I'd finally done it. I'd finally come home and I could get rid of all that anxiety that comes, forgive me for those of you in your first year here, but that comes in the first couple of months of being away. You don't like to admit it because, especially on Parents' Weekend when they come and you want to say, yeah, I'm fine. Anyway, that not being able to articulate what home is causes difficulties is clear from the definitions of justice offered in Book 1. For Cephalus, justice is the telling of truth and paying back what is owed, presumably paying back to someone what is his own, what is oikeon, proper to him. Socrates' counterexample, the man who leaves weapons with you for safekeeping and after having gone mad, returns to ask for them, calls into question whether we really know when something is owned. What's the logos of ownership, of mindship? Polemachus, for whom justice is helping friends and harming enemies, doesn't see that it's not so simple to say who is philos, who is friend or kin or homie, or what it means to help or to harm. Thrasymachus, for whom initially justice is the rule of the stronger, does not see the necessary tension between the selfishness, the ownness of his own teaching and the selflessness of the fact that he makes a general statement of it in public. All three men display souls that are internally at odds, without knowing that they're internally at odds. None's really known to himself Each owns up only to a fictional idea of himself as unproblematically one and whole. And as these self-images determine what each believes to be good for himself, they determine what each thinks and wishes to be his own. For all of them, the problem of justice turns on what they give and get. Because they assume they know who they are, they assume they know what they have a right to give and get. Now, in this, do we really differ much from them? It seems to be human nature to assume that when we think we behave selfishly or selflessly, we can be confident that we know what the self is that is either being satisfied or sacrificed. This self seems not uniquely, for someone like Descartes, an Archimedean point, a rock-like first principle. Accordingly, on the one hand, we always take for granted that we know what it means for something to be our own. There's no place like home. And it feels so good to be home. It's where we're comfortable, where we belong, where we're never out of place. There's something grounding, unquestionable about it. On the other hand, when we think about it, because we can't say what we are, what this ownness consists in, we are in effect homeless. I might love my sister more than the girl next door, even though the girl next door is by all accounts, by all logos, superior. And this taking for grantedness of our ownness is so characteristic of us, so comfortable, so much our own, that the thoughtless assumption that we're at home is in a way what it means for us to be at home. But what has all this got to do with justice? At home we can be altogether what we are, utterly open. At home there will be no discrepancy between what we do on our own and what we do on our own, what we do privately, and what we do openly, publicly. And accordingly, there will be no discrepancy between what we mean, legain, and what we say, legain. Hence, no irony, no lying, and so no poetry, no metaphor, no lies like the truth, no ambiguity. Glaucon's demand at the beginning of Book 2 that the just man be happy is really a demand that there be a sphere where our outer public behavior will not ever be at odds with our private behavior, our inner longing. We want a city that's ours, where we are utterly at home, where we do what we do with no questions asked. As soon as we begin to wonder about what we're doing, for example, whether what we say is what we mean, that is, as soon as lying and irony are possible, and for that matter necessary, we're no longer at home. Do those who tell the noble lie at the end of Book 3 believe it? Believe it themselves? If they don't, wouldn't the need to seem one thing and be another not only cut them off from those to whom they tell the lie, but also in a way from themselves? To feel alienated, split down the middle, out of place, is to feel unhappy. Accordingly, Socrates calls his first attempt at the perfect city, the city of pigs, the true city. In the true city, there would be no difference between speaking and acting. Both would be things which, because we are perfectly suited to do, we thoughtlessly happen to do. Now, this is all connected with Glaucon's flirtation with tyranny. The appeal of tyranny is that it seems to be the fruition of a longing to be in complete control. It is the objective correlative of the ring of Gyges' ancestor at the beginning of Book 2. In this world, whatever you say is, simply is. The gap between being and thinking is altogether closed. This is really the question of the Republic. Human beings, thinking beings, cannot be whole or happy unless being and thinking are one. To be apart from the world is to feel alienated, homeless. And yet, human beings, thinking beings, cannot think and so be human unless being and thinking are apart. The world is not our home unless we are apart from it. How then is it possible to be at once human and happy? It's our nature to long to be at home in the world, which longing would vanish were it realized, and with it, we would vanish. Glaucon begins Book 2 by stating three sorts of good. What's good in itself, what's good for its consequences, and what's good both in itself and for its consequences. Socrates says, well, justice belongs in the category of what's good for itself and its consequences, and Glaucon then demands that it be defended as in the first category, what's good in itself. To satisfy this demand, Socrates has to give an account that collapses what is good in itself and what is good for its consequences. He has to collapse the difference between the experience of justice, which is on the inside, and the result of justice, which is what we see on the outside. In such a world, to be found guilty of a crime would mean to feel guilty for having committed it. The problem is that when this tension between inside and outside is overcome, justice repeatedly disappears. In the City of Pigs, justice is doing one's own thing. But when everyone does his own thing perfectly, no one can know that he's doing his own thing because no one has a view of the whole of which his thing is only a part. Justice becomes utterly externalized, performative, and not experiential. At the end of Book 3, having established classes of guardians who rule and auxiliaries who assist them, in order to make sure that they use this power only for the public good, Socrates denies them possession of any private property, any ousia, any being, and any home to conceal this property, should they have had it. They get what they need by way of sustenance from he ale polis, another ambiguity. This may be translated either as the rest of the city or as the other city. The city, apart from the guardians and auxiliaries, which is supposed to be protected, which, unlike those guarding it, does include private homes and property, is other, alien. Why then should these guardians identify this city as their own, as their home? Socrates has indirectly already acknowledged this problem by providing those who are supposed to rule utterly selflessly the hope of honors both while living and after death, and memorials and the greatest prizes. At the end of Book 4, when we are to use the model, where we are to use the model of justice in the city, that is external justice, to discover the idea of justice in the individual, something curious happens. First, they who are creating this city in speech, Glaucon and the brothers Glaucon and Adeimatus, are unable to find justice. Then they find it rolling around at their feet. Justice exists only for them as observers of the city, not for those who live in the city. Once again, when justice becomes perfect as outer performance, it disappears as inner experience. Similarly, and maybe most importantly, in Book 7, we're never given a motive for those who have escaped the cave to live in the light of the sun to return to rule in the cave. Third jump. After Glaucon and Adeimantus pose their challenges to justice at the beginning of Book 2, Socrates responds that even though their speeches indicate that they are not persuaded by his previous arguments for the goodness of justice, so that their praises of injustice should make him wary of them, their eagerness to be refuted shows that there's more to them than what they say or think, more than their logoi. Something powerful deep within Glaucon and Adeimantus hides themselves from themselves. Their self-knowledge is superficial. Accordingly, despite claiming that having already done his best in Book 1 to address the question of justice, he can't do any more, Socrates accepts their challenge. He proceeds by likening their problem to the difficulty of reading small letters. Wouldn't they be in luck if the same words were written somewhere in much larger letters? Then they could come to know the smaller by reading the larger. The city is larger than the soul, and so Glaucon and Adeimantus can learn the truth of justice in the soul by seeing it writ large in the city. And that's how the whole project of the Republic takes off. There are obvious problems here. How do you know the letters are the same unless you can read both sets, big and small? And if you do know, why do you have to make the inquiry at all? And Socrates speaks not of one reader, but of two anonymous someones who do the reading, one to read the big letters, one the little letters, but we're never told how these two someones are connected. By hypothesis, the little letters are said to be little because they are far off. But then can we ever move closer to them if they are by hypothesis far off? It's their being to be far off. And these are the letters, the very letters, that are analogous to justice in us. We who always think ourselves closest of all to ourselves are in some way necessarily and essentially far from ourselves. We're to look at justice in the city because it's bigger and in something bigger. But what does it mean to say that the city is bigger than the individual? Beginning at least from the story of the ring of the ancestor of Gyges, we're made to see that the individual has an invisible inside and a visible outside. The invisibility of the inside of the just man who seems unjust and the unjust man who seems just, it's the crux of Glaucon's original objection. We're not looking for the seeming, the doxa of the just man, what's ordinarily seen on the outside. We're looking to make his being, his inside, visible, to bring it outside. The parallel between the city and man means that we will look at the inside of the city, not foreign relations, but how citizens treat each other. So the inside of the polis is like the inside of the individual, but enlarged. And yet the inside of the polis is the inside of the individuals in the polis. The outside of the individuals in the polis. By relocating the issue, Socrates claims to have made justice bigger. But really, by externalizing it, he's made it visible. Accordingly, Socrates says that they should look at theososthai, the polis in speech, that should they look at it in speech, they would also see idoi, not justice in the individual, but the idea of justice, its form, but also its look. But if you cut an apple in half to see what's inside, do you really get the inside? Or do you rather get a new outside? It's not an accident that Socrates' interlocutor here, Adeimantus, says of this move to make the inside visible, that Socrates seems to him to speak beautifully, kalos. Education by way of the beautiful has been the principle of the regime that they've outlined in books 2 through 3. Beauty, according to Socrates and the Phaedrus, is the only one of the super-heavenly beings. They're not called ideas here, but let's just jump over that for the moment. The only one of the super-heavenly beings that is visible here below. In the Republic, the beautiful is regularly linked to the visible, and the visible in turn to the sayable, to the generic. This is especially true of life in Kallipolis, their beautiful city. Quote, "As much as is possible then, I said, it must be ordered by you in such a manner that those in Kallipolis in no way abstain from geometry." Their city is named in the Republic only here with the introduction of plane geometry into the philosophical curriculum. The beautiful cleans up what is complicated. It makes it seem simpler, cleaner, less dense than it is. The cost of this cleanness is what? Socrates says of the beautiful in Book 6 that it is unlike the good, which must be real in order to be good, that it's not like the good. If I see a beautiful illusion, wouldn't it still be beautiful, even should I discover it to be illusory? If it were the being of the beautiful always to be an appearance, perhaps the cost of its cleanness would be its imperfect reality. It lacks a certain density. Socrates' parallel between human being and polis gradually turns into a parallel between soul and politeia. This was inevitable once Socrates admitted that the comparison involved the ideia, the form of the polis. Insofar as one can say what a polis is, insofar as it becomes the city in speech, it becomes an ideia. But anything we can say is in some sense generic. A common noun identifies something common, something in principle shareable. Yet to continue to exist, any polis requires loyalty to it as a particular. If my polis is a democracy, politically, do I owe democracy loyalty? Or do I owe it, my own democracy, loyalty? Think of words like motherland and fatherland. Though I may be a wonderful guy and admire mothers generally, is this love of mothers the same as my love of my mother? Cities demand the kind of love that you're supposed to give to mothers. But just as I prefer my sister to my more accomplished next-door neighbor, can I ever put into logos my preference for my own city? Can I make my particular preference generic? And if such a preference is a necessary condition for the very existence of any city, wouldn't a logos of the best city, that is, the politeia, that's the Greek title, translated as republic, wouldn't a logos of the best city have to include an account of why its citizens are devoted to it in particular? I'm grateful for my own jumps because it allows me to drink water in between them. What happens, our next jump, what happens to the soul when it's understood to be parallel not to the polis, but to the idea of the polis, the politeia? The logos of the best city requires a generic account of the power of the particular. In this, the Republic repeatedly falls short. We think we're about to get something like that at the beginning of Book 5, when the coming to be, the genesis of the city becomes an issue. For, as we've seen, to be good, the city will have to be real. But coming to be in the city, and the city's own coming to be, or birth in the city, and the city's own birth, prove very problematic in all sorts of ways. Birth, and so the erotic longing that produces it, are to be rationally manipulated so as to generate the best human beings. But this requires simultaneously acknowledging a sort of Socratic version of anthropos as man and woman. He created them in his image. He created in his image, or in its image, according to Rana Berger, I'll use her translation. In its image, he created them. Even while we must understand the difference between male and female, according to the account in Book 5, is no more significant than the difference between bald and hairy. And the rationalizing of eros means making it generic, and so undermining its inevitable idiosyncrasy. In Book 8, its idiosyncrasy is clear. Your parents are old enough, you're not probably, but you can think of it in terms of love affairs. If you've ever asked the question, what are they doing together? How do these two come together? You're acknowledging a kind of idiosyncratic character to erotic attachment. It's not that you can't describe your beloved. You can certainly give an account. I like blondes, I like this, I like that, and so on and so forth. But if that's all there were to it, then you'd love all those people. You'd be a Don Juan with a particular set of, but that's clearly not what we mean by eros. So there is something inevitably particular about it as we experience it. And so a generic account of it seems deeply problematic. In the Symposium, for example, it's no accident that after Diotima gives her famous account of love of the beautiful itself, it's the sixth of the 6 speeches, it's Socrates' speech on eros. Alcibiades breaks in and all hell breaks loose, and he says, I can't praise anybody but Socrates when Socrates is present. So the reaffirmation of the particularity of erotic longing. So in book 8, we learn that it is owing to the guardian's failure to preserve knowledge of the mathematics of this particularity of Genesis that the best city decays, that those ruling once had knowledge of this nuptial number that allowed them to calculate who should mate with whom and at what time. That they actually had such knowledge is very questionable given how unable over 2 millennia of interpreters have been at unraveling Socrates' account of it. The nuptial number seems to require a sort of mathematics of solidity, something like solid geometry. Sensing a problem, Glaucon calls it not a geometric, but an erotic necessity. When Socrates announces the need for an explicit inquiry into the possibility of the coming to be of their city, he begins by saying, for as to war, I suppose it's plain how they'll make war. A non sequitur? Maybe, but Socrates repeats it in the dialogue Timaeus, where he glosses his request to have the city he displayed to them yesterday put in motion by saying he wants to see it at war. So it seems not to be accidental. For the best city to be real, to come to be, not as generic, but as a particular, it must differentiate itself from all other cities. And this difference, like the ancient diaphora between poetry and philosophy, is a kind of war. To put it rather crudely, if you have a home, and we all do, this is what it means to be a human being, there must be those who do not belong to it, who are other, aloi, and with whom we are always, in principle, at war. Now, Book 7 begins with Socrates' call for Glaucon to make up an image of our nature. What follows is the cave, and the possibility of ascending from it to see not shadows of artifacts created by artificial light, but true beings in the light of the sun. It is the part of the Republic that one needn't even have read the Republic to remember. But our way to wisdom proves problematic. The image at the end of Book 6, the divided line, placed the imagination, eikasia, at the lowest level of our understanding. We're therefore led to wonder what it might mean to see beings so as to know them as they really are. When, having escaped the cave, we look at a real tree, do we see the whole thing all at once? Shadowless seeing sounds great, but doesn't all seeing involve perspective? And doesn't this mean that we will not see everything, and that parts of what we do see will be shaded? However tempting it is to fall back on the etymological connection between eidos, form, idea, looks, and its non-extant root, eido, to see, we don't and really cannot see eide. This is why this most famous part of the Republic is an image, polished up and smoothed, but not real. And our final job. In Book 10, having just finished an account of the ancient quarrel, diaphora, difference, war between philosophy and poetry, in which he exposed how dangerous poetry is, Socrates ends his account of justice in the soul with a poetic myth. His poem contains a host of problems and ambiguities. Socrates begins by likening it to the story of Alcinous in the Odyssey, where Odysseus provides his own account of his travels. As these 4 books contain all of the monsters Odysseus encounters, as well as his descent into Hades, might they, and by extension, this poem too, that's compared to them, might they be a clever lie by the most notorious of liars? Socrates starts the myth by saying, I will tell of In Greek, eros. Eros, in the genitive. But ero means either I will tell or I love. It therefore points ahead to the pun that follows it, eros, of for eros, love, where a sort of compensatory lengthening occurs as the epsilon in eros is exchanged for an eta and the omega for an omicron. An interesting poetic device, but what does eros have to do with an account of the afterlife? Dies in battle. He's presumably an auxiliary, not a guardian. He's a warrior. His corpse is brought home, where after 10 days he awakens to relate what he's seen while dead. Is to be home to be dead? Much of what he says is secondhand. He talks with those who have returned from the heaven above and the hell below, and perhaps the most important thing we hear seems like the old game telephone, where something is whispered in someone's ear, and then that person whispers it in the next person's ear, and so on and so forth. And you see how it comes out at the end of the circle, and you all laugh at how it's been so extraordinarily distorted from one person to the other. When says that the dead souls are told that their choice of their new lives depends on them alone and their virtue, he's reporting the words of an anonymous prophetes, interpreter, who is speaking for Lachesis, the fate who deals with the past, who is in turn acting in the name of her mother, necessity. We're getting a fourth-hand account, or actually, to be more precise, an indefinitely handed account, because we have no idea how it was handed off to Socrates, where he heard about it, so telephone. We're meant to be suspicious of the myth of as Glaucon should have been, had he kept to his original demand that justice and the soul be good in itself and not for its consequences, because a large part of the story that tells is the story of the punishments and rewards that you face after death. So first sees 4 chasms, 2 leading up to heaven, one for going up, one for going down. I think of them like escalators, they're always right next to each other. And 2 leading down beneath the earth, again, one for going up and one for going down. Those returning from beneath the earth lament what they've suffered. Those from heaven tell of the good they have undergone and the beautiful sights they've seen. Will return to this moral topography, but first he tells of a straight light, like a column, that looks like a rainbow, but much purer and brighter. It stretches between heaven and earth and binds them like the rope that strengthens the hull of a trireme. The light binds heaven so as to hold the entire revolution together. It's not exactly clear, especially at this point in the myth, what on earth that means, that it binds so as to hold the entire revolution together. But at a minimum, the light does seem a principle of order and beauty. Now, it's hard, though, to reconcile the column of light with what comes next, much more elaborate account of what he calls the spindle of necessity. It's also quite beautiful and seems to hold things together. The column of light and the spindle of necessity are distinct, and yet they seem to occupy the very same place. So how are we to understand this combination of apartness and togetherness? Like a real spindle, this one has a stem with a hook at the end and a whorl, a weighted cup. It's sort of like a flywheel that keeps the stem turning evenly. The stem is adamantine, the whorl is made of adamant and other kinds of things. Within this outermost cup are 7 more hemispheres nested inside each other, like bowls decreasing in size. So looking from above, you can see all of them spin on the axis of the adamantine stem of the spindle. The rim of each of the 8 whorls, each of the cups, is different in breadth and in color from the others. The whole apparatus turns in one direction on the stem, but the inner 7 whorls turn gently at different rates in the opposite direction. The spindle itself spins in the joints of necessity. Now, these and other details make it clear that we're meant to see the display of color in motion as an image of the heavenly spheres of the sun, the moon, the planets, and the fixed stars, a beautiful cosmos. He then adds sound. Atop the whorls are sirens, each always sending forth a different note, and the notes are in perfect harmony. Then the 3, for some reason called well-dressed fates, daughters of necessity, sing. So in contrast to the sirens, presumably, they're not singing single notes, but melodies to accompany the constant harmony. The sirens provide a permanent background, eternity. The fates provide change, a melody in time. We're given a beautiful musical image of a cosmos simultaneously eternally at rest and forever in motion. Lachesis, disposer of lots, is what it means, sings of what has come to be, the past. Clotho, the spinster, sings of taonta, beings, the present. Atropos, not to be turned, sings of ta melonta, things about to be, the future. Clotho, the present, is responsible for the spinning of the whole, the outer whorl, which always moves at the same rate. Atropos, the future, fiddles around with the inner whorls, which vary from one another and from the outer whorl. Still, each of the two slips up at times. This is when Lachesis steps in and lays hold of each whorl in turn with her hand. At first, then, everything looks perfectly orderly, so that even the change is unchanging. But when Lachesis is moved to look back at and correct her sister's lapses, a certain indeterminacy, contingency is introduced to what would otherwise seem a system utterly governed by necessity. Apparently, there are different sorts of necessity. Necessity has joints, not simply a lap. And she has daughters, and her daughters' actions are not altogether in sync with one another. It's no accident that this is where Ur's tale turns moral. The recurring puzzle of the myth is that, on the one hand, it has a fixed, eternal character that presents itself as something to be looked at and listened to. It is a beautiful spectacle, theia. On the other hand, it will be an account of the various lives dead souls choose for their next installment of life. They choose what they think is good, what one would pray for to a goddess, a theia. This punning ambiguity, theia and theia, are distinguishable only by the syllable on which the accent is placed. The ambiguity is present, if only tacitly, in the very first line of the Republic. Socrates went down to the Piraeus to pray and to see, to seek the good and behold the beautiful. On the surface, the Republic assumes there is no tension between the two. Beneath the surface, it repeatedly asks us how we are to put together these twos, the beautiful and the good, eternity and temporality, being and becoming. At the very end of the dialogue, this problem returns with the choice of lives. Upon arriving at the spindle of necessity, the souls are brought directly to Lachesis. Curiously, she's both the distributor of lots from which they will choose their futures and the fate who governs the past. This is where we hear Socrates' report of someone's report, of Ur's report, of the prophetess report, of Lachesis' rendering of her mother's will. And it goes this way. Souls who live for a day. It is a beginning of another death-bringing turnaround of a mortal race. A daimon, a god, a fate, a destiny, will not select you by lot, but you will take a destiny. And him first obtaining a lot, let him choose a life to be with by necessity. But there is virtue. By honoring and dishonoring it, that which is without a master, each will have more and less of it. Blame is of the one choosing. A god is blameless. Now, before the choosing of the lots cast by the prophetess, the souls are told that once making their choice, there's no going back. They will be their choice. What they choose and so what they will be depends on how much they honor virtue. And how much virtue each has depends on how much each honors virtue. Presumably, although it is Socrates, not the prophetess, that draws this conclusion, and he only claims it's likely, the more virtue you have, the better you will fare, and so the happier you will be. Everything is at stake, and everything depends on how virtuous you are, and yet your virtue seems to depend on who you have been in your previous life. the souls choose one by one. There are lots of animal lives on the table, and presumably lots of human lots, although those mentioned are primarily bad choices. But as we're told, we are told there are always enough good lots left. The order of choice doesn't really matter. If you choose badly, it's your own fault. We, of course, are still wondering what it means for one who, having lived a life, already has a soul of a certain sort, freely to choose a new life. Wouldn't necessity govern this choice? And yet necessity has been repeatedly presented as itself ambiguous. Here, Socrates interrupts Ur's account, but rather than resolving the problem, the tension in it, he intensifies it. The choice of a life, we are told, is so important that we must ignore every other study to become students of one in particular, how to distinguish the good, the krestos, or the good or useful life, from the poneros, the bad or toilsome life, and accordingly how to choose the better from among those that are possible, and finally how to analogizein, to calculate or add up how everything they have just talked about holds in a virtuous life. So thinking or calculation comes in as necessary to put all of this together. And yet one of the things necessary to this mixture, this is ease of learning. Socrates, therefore, is in the position of saying that on the one hand, something like philosophy is the one thing needful to syllogizein, to think together the best possible mixture that makes up the best possible life. While on the other hand, one of the things to be mixed into this life is ease in thinking things together. To choose what you need to be what you're choosing. If you're smart in your choice, you'll choose to be smart. Lest we think this is simply the fate of those dead souls in Hades choosing to renew their lives, Socrates adds that this best or strongest choice is to be made whether by those living or those having died. Every soul, by virtue of being a soul, is in the same position. To choose well, it needs to know, and yet does not really know what's best for it. What it has instead is an adamantine doxa, opinion, seeming, a warning always to choose the mean and never go to extremes. But is this extreme of moderation really compatible with the life of the mind? Can genuine thought never be dangerous? Never get you into trouble? In confirmation of this dilemma, we learn from that having lived an orderly life in a good regime doesn't help you choose well after you've died. The souls who arrive from above to choose new lives choose tyranny. Virtue has come entirely too easily to them, so easily that they think they can have it all. Thinking they can be in complete control so as to be utterly at home in the world, they choose the life of a tyrant. And when their fate turns tragic, they pay precisely in terms of home, they end up eating their own children. Their souls have been so formed by the perfect ease of justice in their previous lives that they never even think to blame themselves. Instead, they blame fate or chance. Socrates presents this as a lack of philosophy in them, but philosophy has already been acknowledged to be very, very rare. Their tyrannical ambition is rather a sign of the inadequacy of moral virtue. Moral virtue is only habitual, a matter of opinion, however adamantine. 1,000 years in heaven hasn't helped them. It's actually hurt them. Happiness breeds thoughtlessness. Those who arrive from beneath the earth, having suffered, fare better. They choose less quickly. On the one hand, Socrates takes this to mean they're more patient and choose well. On the other hand, he attributes their success to the chance of the lot. But it's not clear what the lots have to do with the choices, since there are always not bad lives available, we're told. The exchange of positions of those from above and those from below seems rather to be a vindication of the plotline of the Republic. Glaucon never would have made the demand in Book 2 unless he was troubled by injustice. Those altogether untroubled by it, those in the perfect politeia, who do their own thing and only their own thing perfectly, can never understand justice. It doesn't roll around at their feet. Not seeing what difficulty it's meant to overcome, they cannot see why it's choice-worthy. Still, we are assured that since, quote, if someone always, whenever he would arrive at the life there, could also mean the life here, should he philosophize in a healthy way, and the lot of chance for him not fall out among the last, he runs the risk, from the reporting from there, not only to be happy here or there, but also that he will make his way from here to there, and here again, not by a way under the earth and rugged, but both smooth and heavenly. We're saved if we philosophize in a healthy way. But what does that mean? Does philosophy not necessarily involve some sense of lack? And where exactly do we perform this healthy philosophizing? Everything depends on the difference between here and there, but the language here makes the difference rather obscure. Choice is choice. It's the same in Hades as in our daily lives. Here is there is here. We're, on the one hand, determined by what we are, and on the other hand, we make ourselves what we are. Choice can't be unconditioned, and necessity cannot be unconditional. The examples of choices of lives concludes with are instructive. Owing to his hatred of women, Orpheus, a poet and singer, chooses to become a swan. Thamyris, on the other hand, also a poet and singer, chooses to become an aedon, literally a songstress, but also the word for nightingale. He chooses, not from hatred, but presumably to become a more perfect version of himself. Ajax, remembering that not he, but Odysseus was awarded the armor of Achilles, rejects becoming a human being to become an epithet. Not lion-like Ajax, but lion Ajax. Agamemnon does something similar, but from a very different sort of disappointment. His wife kills him, so he chooses to become an eagle. That is a metaphor for him in Aeschylus's Agamemnon. Atalanta chooses to be more herself by changing herself. She chooses to become a man so as to gain stature as an athlete. Epeius, maker of the Trojan horse, also changes his sex to become himself. He chooses to become a female artisan. Thersites, maker of laughter, when Odysseus beats him in the Iliad for suggesting that the Greeks return home, chooses to become what he is, an ape. But he doesn't know that he's an ape, so he chooses himself not because he's choosing a better version of himself, but despite himself. What seems clear is that all choose because of what they were in their past lives, but they do so in altogether different ways. Their choices make sense, they're retroactively intelligible and perhaps even necessary, but they're prospectively unpredictable, contingent. In the final example, we think that maybe, just maybe, by way of Socrates is led up to the choice of the life of philosophy by the clever Odysseus, but while Odysseus chooses to become chooses a private life free of politics and business, he seems not to be striving, but rather settling. Perhaps one can no more choose the life of philosophy than one can choose to engage in philosophical conversation. It's not as though you sit down, go back to your dorm room, and you say to your roommate, let's have a philosophical conversation. I mean, where do you go from there? You can't, that's not the way it works. You have to be drawn in by something. Something has to catch your eye to be a problem. We don't choose it by an act of will. The mythover divides into two parts. They occupy the same place. The one is beautiful and sets up an eternal structure of the whole, of the cosmos, and of time. It sets the stage for the second part, about the good, which explains our choices and their consequences. Everything in the moral part depends on the distinction between life here and life there. First, we see human beings punished and rewarded on the basis of what they have done here. This makes it seem as though what we have done here determines what will happen to us there, our rewards and punishments after death. And yet our choices here are in turn determined by the lives we chose there. The problem is that life there is also a life. You can't make a soul intelligible by turning it inside out to make a display of it and show it through and through. You know that because of conversation. It is very strange. You converse with a very close friend, someone you know, someone you think you have a certain kinship with. You can predict what will happen, but of course if you could really absolutely predict what will happen, you wouldn't have any conversation. You wouldn't want to conversate. Why would you? You don't need them if you know exactly what they're going to say. So there is an opacity that must remain, even though it's not the same as the opacity of the person you just happen to observe while you're walking down the street. You could say, the problem is that life is life. To make the soul fully intelligible is to kill it. You can't set the soul free by nor can you set the soul free by having it choose itself. What would be doing the choosing? This tension is what it means to be a soul. Accordingly, the soul cannot be perfected. It is because our souls have this opacity and are not altogether predictable that political life is necessary. But owing to this very unpredictability and opacity, the perfect political order is also impossible. Solidity, home, the invisibility of what's inside, the impossibility of a generic account of what is particular, poetry. Are these jumps connected? We sense solidity, but cannot say it. What is in some way most real is alagon. It resists speech. To give a logos of something is to express it, to press it or squeeze it out, to place it outside so that it can be seen. But the world of sight is a world of surfaces. The wisdom outside the cave, modeled on sight, must be spurious. It flattens the world. In precluding all experience of depth, it must give us a counterfeit world. Logos is always logos of. There's always something beneath or beyond it that is in some way both it and not it, something for which we're groping, that we can't simply, and that something can't simply be another logos. Logos promises us the world, yet while frequently providing us with beautifully crafted hints, it can never make good on this promise. The experience of the inadequacy of the surface is somehow the experience of depth. In philosophy, you do not simply see the world, you grope at it. The experience of questioning, knowledge of ignorance, groping, aporia, indirectly substitutes for a full account of what lies underneath, solid geometry. There's no place like home. It's natural for us to seek to close the gap between ourselves and the world. For as Aristotle teaches us, the soul is somehow all things. It always wants to come home. It is thus perfectly natural for us to seek a place where we fit perfectly. The truth of Glaucon's longing is made visible in the project Socrates inaugurates in the Republic, the founding of a perfect city. But the city they found cannot be an external image of the inside of the soul. There is no place like home. Still, in the progressive display of the necessary failure of the city in speech, the soul does find an image. For here, we not only come up short, we come up deeply short. Poetry may be dangerous because it cannot help giving us a dolled-up version of reality, but it's nevertheless necessary, for it is the fate of all logos to doll up reality. Logos must be exoteric. And so an esoteric reading, an esoteric teaching of the sort we find in the Republic can never simply be an alternative, fully articulable teaching, cleverly hidden from view for only the very smart to uncover. Insofar as it becomes visible, it must do so poetically, as a problem. For the heart of things can never simply show itself on the surface. It's the problem inherent in the surface of things, and only in the surface of things, that is the heart of things. Thank you.